Now, to make this argument, I'm going to describe to you two case studies. The first concerns a computer program that seeks to engineer cooperation. The programmers have, however, too crude a social understanding of cooperation to make the effort work. The second case study takes up an aspect of capitalism perhaps more prominent today than in Burckhardt's time: the destructive effect of inequality on communication and cooperation within organizations. I'll focus again on technicians, in this instance, technicians who are more socially sophisticated than their bosses. So my two versions of crude are: first, our failure to understand how cooperation works, and second, the brutalizing effects of inequality upon practicing cooperation. Now, if you have been a reader of mine, you know that I get lost in details. I like concrete experience. So I warn you, I will lose you in concrete experience in presenting these two case studies. Germans supposedly only want to have the meaning rather than the experience, but I'm going to treat you like Anglo-Saxons. So let me first say something about technology and cooperation. Google Wave is a program meant to shape cooperation online. It aims to make the evolution of ideas and contributions appear on screen in crisp and clear form. Google Wave also tries to be open so that participants can add freely or alter the course of the project. A very old idea, that of the experimental workshop, has found in Google Wave a new site in cyberspace. But the effort has failed. The program was up and running for just 1 year, from 2009 to 2010, before the company shut it down. I have had a quite direct personal experience of this failure, since I was one of the users in the program's beta testing version. That is, where you take human guinea pigs like myself and you try to do a trial run about whether the program works, for which we did not get paid. We had our hands held, no more than that. The Google Wave group I joined sought to assemble information and create policy about migration to London. The data consisted of statistics, voice and transcribed interviews, photographs and film of immigrant communities, maps of where people came from and where they settled in London. The participants were scattered across London, Britain, and the continent. We posted, read, and chatted every few days. The sharp social point of this project was to find out why the second generation of immigrants in Britain tends to be more disaffected with the country than the beachhead first generation. It's a particular issue among families from Muslim countries. That is, that the children are more disaffected than their first generation parents. But there was also a technical challenge. Statisticians and ethnographers give diverging accounts of this disaffection. The statisticians chart blocked paths of mobility in education and work. The ethnographers find the young idealizing the places and ways of life their parents have left, no matter their present circumstances. The statisticians make comparisons between beachhead fathers and their acclimatized sons. The ethnographers are puzzled by the greater cultural bond children feel to their grandparents. And just to make matters more complicated, the British government sponsor, worried about alienated Muslim youth, wanted to know what policies it should put in place. Could cooperation online sort all this out? Could the technology help us get a clearer understanding of this very complicated social issue? I had imagined when we started that the technology would be a passive participant, but it turned out to play an active role. The program's engineers had a simple model in mind about what practical cooperation means. Google Wave makes use of colored text, hypertext links, and side windows to create a linear narrative. The program does preserve what's come up before in the discussion and makes the past immediately accessible on screen. Its operations are set up, though, to side window or suppress irrelevancies and dead ends, leaving intact on the main screen a straight line account of getting from inception to consummation in a project. This idea of linear narrative as shaping cooperation argues for a more economical way of cooperating that occurs in spoken language, since irrelevancies fall by the screen's wayside. That's why, in principle, Google embodies a linear visual narrative, one that progresses step by step to a clarifying denouement. You'd have to, I should have maybe brought you a screen thing of this. I happen to be quite short-sighted, and the main screen I can barely read. The side screen gets, the more you move away from the main narrative, the smaller the print becomes. There's a zoom function you can use, a very odd one in Google programming. It's a kind of thing where visually you're constantly being told, because of these inequalities in what you see, to think straightforward. The more clarity there is online, the more clarity there is supposedly in the work you're doing. The program is clear and simple, as I say, but it's too simple, failing to account the complexities which develop through cooperation. Linear progression tends to discard, as we say in English, thinking outside the box, the seeming irrelevancy which later proves to be pregnant. In our group, as give and take focused ever more on one issue, like ethnic migration to London from outside Europe, interjections like, "What about young women moving to London from the north?" registered less. These interjections became sidebarred or side-screened. By contrast, spoken dialogue which jerks and swerves thrust forward the tangential or seemingly odd remark. It's more, if you want a phrase for this, it's not exactly that it's non-linear. It would be it would be more dialogic in the terms of that we use. That is something that's happening like this. The march of linear progression on screen eliminated this dialogic quality of the spoken embodied voice. Side screening has a social consequence. Somebody queries the researcher who had earlier interjected the issue of young women migrants. "We haven't heard from you in a while." And she responds, "No, the work has moved on. Her time had passed." Since stray thoughts are eliminated step by step as a project moves ever surely towards its completion, the contribution of stray thoughts can feel, the contributors of stray thoughts can feel left out as the project becomes increasingly defined. Now, I have to say that Google Wave is not a dictator. It can be rejiggered, for instance, by making the main screen smaller than the sidebars surrounding it. But then the side screen looks increasingly a mess and becomes harder to use. The larger problem, though, is the conception of cooperative work. The linear narrative concept discourages lateral thinking, or dialogics, if you want to put this in other terms. Lateral thinking involves shoving unlike ideas or different practices together, which is what ordinary language means by thinking outside the box, or what old scientists meant by experimentation. That is the adjacency of unlikes. Lateral thinking is a basic driver of innovation, and people practicing lateral thinking together are putting their cooperation in service of complexity. Because complex layers of meaning did not seem to build up, dealing neither with our social nor technical issues, enthusiasm in our group began to wane as we followed the narrative envisioned by this program. Instead of working online, therefore, we started getting on airplanes, the hideous torture tools of modern life, in order to meet face-to-face and practice some lateral thinking. The program has proved a fiasco for other users, and in the summer of 2010, Google canceled the service it began a year before. Few other user groups stayed with it. Quote, "I can't see why people wouldn't want it," said Lars Rasmussen, one of its designers, and also with his brother, the programmer behind Google Maps, which is a beautiful program. Again, quote, "It's a very clever product. You never know why it didn't work," declared Google Chief Executive Eric Schmidt to me. But I think we do know. Rather than being difficult to use, Google Wave was too primitive in use. And this is why I've talked to you at such length about it. This kind of technology might seem to qualify as a brutal simplifier, but we want to clarify this Burkhardian judgment. As most of you know only too well, the public tends to blame technologists for making programs user-friendly or easy to use. And of course, there are many machines we want just to be simple and easy to use without understanding their innards. None of us wants to get involved in the electronic complexity under the bonnets of modern automobiles. We just want to drive. But some machines should raise a reflexive question. The paradoxical thing about Google Wave is that it showed that in doing serious cooperation, and this is really why I tell you about this, in doing serious cooperation, users are capable of handling more complexity than programs like this provide for. In the studies I've done over the years on workers, this point has come home to me again and again. Human capacities in the workplace are far greater than the institutional or formal use of those capacities. The economist Amartya Sen formulated this issue in terms of what he calls the capabilities theory of development in modern society. He and the many people associated with his school have shown the great gap which exists between the cognitive capacities of the human animal and the realization of those capacities in modern society. Society wastes capability. For Sen, the reason for this waste is economic and political. Repressive regimes, he argues, invest less in human beings than in more open societies. I'd emphasize to you the social and technological link in this same matter, and focus on the social side within relatively liberal and democratic societies. In these societies, our society, people are capable of more mutually beneficial cooperation than they actually practice. The use and failure of Google Wave exemplifies one reason this occurs. Our ideas about what cooperation is itself are too rigid, too fixed, too linear. Linear equates with primitive.